of Pretty Walks and Ugly Talks. Today, my guest is Julieanna. We met through a mutual friend recently, about a month or so ago. Had a very long lunch meeting that was amazing with plans to go to dinner, but then we were like, "Ooh, we're too tired." So we followed up and had another meeting, and just we have a lot that we like to talk about. We have a lot of topics that are important to both of us, and I think that you've walked a little bit ahead of me in some of them, most of them, which is so great though, because I feel like I can learn so much from what you've been through and what you've learned and gained and instilled in your life. And I'm sort of starting those journeys. But the one that I really want to touch on that's important to both of us, so much so, and it should be important to everyone, but you gotta learn, boundaries. It is something that I've started, I've played this game of starting them and instilling them, and then when they get tough, I kind of retract, and then you restart them, and it's almost harder to restart them. So what do you feel, what's your perspective or opinion on boundaries?
I think we both identify boundaries as something so important in our lives. And it's a life skill. It's like any other life skill. The more you practice it, the better you get. And I think people have this misconception of boundaries, that it's a negative, that it's going to put distance between them and their friends or their family or their coworkers. But actually the opposite is true. It can enhance your relationships. It increases trust in relationships.
Well, you know what the expectation is, and that's just a really healthy place to be.
Yes, and it increases respect too, because it is a self-care method that we all need to practice. Yeah. So I think it's important to know what boundaries are and what keeps us from establishing them. And I think boundaries are personal and physical limits that we set to protect ourselves, to protect our goals, to protect the people that we love, and to also take responsibility for the relationships in our lives. Unfortunately, usually we don't learn to set boundaries till we're usually like in our 30s or 40s. Because it takes life experience to do that.
It does.
It's hard to teach someone boundaries when they don't have examples of that in their life.
Right.
You know, even though when we're young, like toddlers, which we're very good at that age of establishing our boundaries. Like no. But along the way, we kind of start to please people and fit into our environments and our cultures, and it makes us less likely to say no to someone.
You get molded into this thing that you're supposed to be nice and kind to everyone and not stand up for yourself necessarily.
Exactly.
And I think that's where the boundaries they start to dwindle as you get older.
And it becomes a problem until we start to see signs that we need boundaries. And so, what keeps us from setting boundaries, and I think the biggest thing is fear, and we've talked about that. They balance our independence with our connection with others. It helps us build trust and respect, produce mutual understanding in our conversations, and it fosters self-care. I guess we'll talk about that.
Yeah, and the self-care, that's the part that I have taken away from it the most, and I think that's hard for others to see, because you can't see that someone's getting healthier in their brain and their mind.
Right.
Necessarily. Eventually I think you can, because it comes out in all other shapes and forms. But that's where people are like, what do you mean your brain can't handle? I always say, I don't have space for that.
That's good.
And I've said it so much in the last 6 months
that
my family is finally getting it and saying, okay, let me know when you do. It's been a game changer. Because that doesn't happen every time, but they're getting better at it.
Yeah, that's how you're establishing your boundaries, and that's how you're communicating to them. I think as women, especially as mothers, we tend to think self-care as selfish, but it's not.
It's not.
No.
It has changed. Listen, I'm uptight anyways. I've got 5-year-old twins, but just setting boundaries with them and within myself of how I react to what I can or cannot control what they're doing has been a game changer in my parenting. It's, and in that's life changing because that's what you do day in and day out. So that kind of a priority.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you have to prioritize yourself. Otherwise, you're not giving your children what they need from you. If you're always functioning at 40% of your capacity, well, then they're only getting 20% of you. They're not getting everything they need. And then at the end of the day, you're depleted because you've given what little you're holding on to everyone else around you.
Correct.
So yeah.
And then you're in bed crying and not regrouping from the depletion from earlier.
Right. What are you? Yeah, and we're not filling ourselves up. So that's a big reason that boundaries are so important. And you bring up a good point. What are those signs that we need boundaries? And over the years, I've heard some really good reasons for establishing boundaries and examples. If you have a friend that says, you know what, if you really cared about me, you would always be available to me. You'd always be available to me or to take my phone call if you really cared about me. If a romantic partner pressures you to change your religion or important beliefs to accommodate them. If an abusive partner says you should always be available for them, no matter what, and sacrifice your plans and your timing and your schedule to always accommodate their needs. I think a big sign for me that signals I need to set a boundary is if you're experiencing burnout, resentment, anxiety, irritability.
That's a big one.
That's a big one for me. I'm like, okay, what is going on? And I find it's usually I've said yes to too many things. Right. My plate is overflowing.
Or yes to one individual or one topic too many times, and you're not getting anything in return. Mm-hmm. That's where the resentment and irritability comes from for me. It's just Absolutely. Like, okay, I can't give you any more right now. I am depleted, like we said earlier.
Because some people will just keep taking.
Oh, they will.
And so we talked about, if they're so great, if boundaries are so helpful, what keeps us from setting boundaries? And my experience, the number one thing that keeps people from setting boundaries is fear. Fear of rejection, fear of not being liked, fear of hurting someone's feelings.
I think that's the big one for me.
And we could do a whole segment on fear.
Right.
And I think the important thing is to remember that we have to live with fear. It's part of our everyday. It's not something we should practice pushing away. When we invite it in, it's like you said, it's a game changer. And I think the best illustration I've shared with you, and it's because it resonated with me, was there's a third grade teacher who noticed her students were so anxious before taking tests and they were performing poorly, and it was just ruining their whole day. And so she brought in an old chair and the class got together and they decorated it. And they all painted it, put stickers on it. They all took ownership of this chair and they called it their fear chair. And then going forward, when they took tests, they would all come in and acknowledge their fear and put it in this chair. And the chair was in the corner of the room. That was the fear chair. And that's where they put their fear. They would talk to it and they would say, I feel you, you gotta go over there. Yep. And not only did their scores go up on their tests, but their anxiety came down, and they adapted this method into their everyday lives so that when they were doing projects or something that would stress them out or make them anxious, they would be like, no, that's fear. And they identified it and they would go, I'm gonna go put it in the chair and come back. And although that seems such a maybe easy, childish way to handle it.
Yeah, but I think it's genius, especially relating or giving those children that lesson. That's huge. That's an amazing teacher.
That is, I know, and I don't remember who it was a story I heard, but I've adapted that as a writer because, when you're in a room and you're writing and no one is kind of forcing you to go further and you're kind of stuck, there's a lot of fear associated with it, writer's block, whatever you want to call it. And it has kind of helped me as a visual person, as a creative spirit, to say, okay, I feel you breathing down it. Go over there, sit in your chair. You can be present, but you have no control over what I'm doing here. This is my project. These are my deadlines. This is my work. Sit over there. You're a spectator. You have no power here. And it really it helps.
It does. I think
to do that.
I'm a visual person, so the fear chair thing works for me. I love that story. And I think that that's just huge for those kids to learn that lesson early on, because can you imagine how much less anxiety you would have had growing up if someone had taught you a skill like that, a place to put an emotion that you have to deal with.
Yeah.
But a correct way to handle it.
Yeah, a practical way.
Yes.
That you can incorporate and practice.
I love that for them.
And I think usually after people identify, okay, maybe I need a boundary, I'm being triggered. How do you establish boundaries? That's the big question. And I think, there's a different formula for everybody, but there's some basic starting points. And one is to identify who or what it is you need for protection from. Determine the best time for that conversation. Timing is everything with those conversations. Communication of explaining boundaries is something you have to feel your power in that moment. So you can't be distracted. Typically it needs to be done privately with that person. You have to prepare for that conversation, and you have to anticipate resistance, because when you establish a boundary, you are changing the rules of the game, right? And the person, I find people have two reactions. Number one is they're like, they're, oh, you don't love me, you don't care about me. Why are you doing this? They make you feel bad to break you down and remove the boundary. And let me tell you, the only people that give you a hard time about setting boundaries are those who benefit from you not having any.
Correct.
So anyone giving you pushback about boundaries does not have your best interest at heart.
Correct.
Because if you come to me and say, this is what I'm doing, whatever it is, for my mental health, to become a better mother, whatever, people who care about you are going to support you in that. That's exciting. Tell me more. How can I help? So if someone is not supporting you, they don't care about you.
Right.
And that's sometimes a really hard thing to process. And that's sometimes where that fear comes in, is people don't really want to hear how the other person truly feels about them.
Well, and it's heartbreaking, because when you are setting these boundaries, it can be a very lonely place. And then on top of it, I shouldn't say you are, but like your fear is that, okay, this relationship isn't going to exist anymore because I'm bringing these boundaries to the table. However, if those boundaries aren't respected, that relationship never existed to begin with.
Exactly.
But it's a scary and it's a hard place to be in, but man, is it so worth it.
It is worth it. And we usually get to that point, which is why we have to enact and enforce boundaries, is because that person has gotten you to a place where you have nothing else to lose. Like, you can't take it anymore. You've hit a point where you're like, I'm done.
I think my other point with that is, like, if I am constantly thinking negative thoughts to you, or I have nothing positive to say to you, I need space. I need time away. I don't have space for you in my brain at that point. And that's because if I'm becoming a bad person, or a person that I'm not proud of because I'm around you, or because it's not healthy for me, I don't want to be there. I don't want to be ugly because of choices that you are making, that kind of thing.
And then another thing is that you have to reinforce those boundaries and stand your ground, because people will, that's the other reaction that people have. Typically the second one is you'll lay these boundaries down, but people kind of up the ante, meaning they just have to find your hot button. And for some people that's like, oh, well, if you don't respond to my messages, I'm going to do this to myself. Or if you don't give me the attention that I need, or response, or communicate with me, I'm going to do this. So people will try to push our buttons. And again, you have to anticipate that. Whereas, best case scenario, that doesn't happen, but rarely.
It's gonna happen.
Rarely when you tell someone, here's a boundary, this is no longer working for me,
Right.
they tend to have a response.
Well, like you
And
said, you're changing the rules to the game.
You are.
And nobody likes that if they're
Yeah.
playing the game how they want to play it.
Yeah. And so there's so many examples I've seen over the years of the types of boundaries that people have set. I'll share some of those with you, and if you have any, feel free to jump
Yes,
in. But
please.
Physical boundaries. Now, I'm a hugger, so I really try to be sensitive to those who are maybe not a hugger. But I had someone share this with me. I thought it was so important because it's just not who I am. But they're not a hugger. I don't want to be hugged unless I initiate it.
Okay.
And I was like, I'm so glad that you said that, because that's kind of one of those very healthy boundaries that some
Yeah.
people establish for whatever reason. They have that. And so that's an example of a boundary you can set. Emotional boundaries. If you say to someone, I don't feel comfortable sharing that type of personal information with you. Or, and I've had this with people, I don't prefer you sharing photos of my children on your social media pages. And with boundaries, you shouldn't have to give a long explanation.
No, it's dry.
As
It's cut.
I mean, if it's for your mental health and your physical well-being, or that of your children's, or something else that you're protecting, that should be good enough. You don't allow someone to control the narrative of your boundaries by asking you questions in an attempt to make you renege on your boundaries.
I have found that the more you explain a boundary, the more the person is likely to pull tiny things out and then manipulate those tiny things and question you on those. And then then you're like, wait, am I crazy for feeling this way or setting this boundary? No. But also you don't have to explain it.
Yeah.
Cut and dry. This is what I need. And if you respect me, you will care about that. You will
This is what I need.
allow me to do that.
Exactly, yes. Sexual relationships, I don't feel comfortable having sex yet in our relationship. That's as easy as that. That's a
It's that
boundary we
simple.
set. Financial relationships, setting boundaries with having separate checking and savings accounts. I don't feel comfortable sharing all my finances,
Yeah.
connecting them to you. I prefer at this time to have a personal checking and savings account separate. Family relationships.
These are the hardest boundaries.
It's interesting you say that. I feel like that's where most people usually start boundary setting, is with
Yeah.
a very close family member.
Mhm.
It's usually, yes, that, I don't feel comfortable you attempting to parent my children in front of me, or you exposing my children to do this. If this continues, you'll no longer be able to see them. So that's a great example of a boundary.
Yes. I
Mhm.
think that people can relate to that
Oh,
very much so.
Oh.
There's gonna be a lot of people that can understand that one.
yeah. And then the great thing about having boundaries, establishing them, and you get to a point where you're comfortable with them, you get to a point where you also respect yourself more, and then other people respect you for that. I will tell you, many years ago, I was one of the first people that in my family people would call to ask for money, because I did not have boundaries in that part of my life. And it took me a while to learn, I am all about a hand up, not a hand out. So once I started setting boundaries with people, like, I'm not giving you money to pay your rent, it definitely affected some of those relationships. But I will say all of those people are still involved in my life, and our relationships are amazing now. But we had to get through that.
Yeah.
But guess what? Nobody ever calls me and my family asking or begging for money,
Perfect.
because I am, excuse me, I respected myself to set boundaries. I respected my finances to in order to set boundaries, and other people have seen that now, and they respect me more, and they respect my relationship with money. And it also sets a great example for people too on
Yes.
how to establish boundaries, like for our children, because our children are watching, like they're watching you say, I don't have a place for this, or what is it that you say?
I don't have space for this
I don't
right
have
now.
space for this. I love that.
With what you said about the children, like, that's the other thing that's so important with setting these boundaries, is if you don't, then you're depleted, and your children they're getting what we said earlier about having less of you, but you're kind of pissed off too, because you're mad about this situation over here, then all your energy's gone, then they're still not getting anything, and then they're getting the shitty version of you, and it just it trickles, where it could just stop at the beginning and say, no thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not allowing that into my space.
Yeah.
I just can't.
Well, and so, yeah, that's a great point. And the other side of that, the aftermath of establishing boundaries is that you do have healthier relationships, even if that means, some people, because you have to love some people from a distance.
You do.
You have to establish relationships from a distance with some people. And sometimes your relationships are better with some people from a distance.
I agree.
With strict boundaries. You have more self-respect, you get, you take rejection better, and you're able to live with fear more comfortably.
I think it builds your confidence too.
It does.
Because you just know what you're willing to take and not take. I know it's a heavy word and it seems negative, but I have a hard time saying anything. Other than unless you're on the other side of it and you're
Yeah.
getting the boundary thrown at you. But if that's the case, then stand up and own what your
Yeah.
person needs from you.
Setting boundaries helps you find your voice. And so for those going through a transitional period of their life, it's a great way to find your voice.
It is.
And you're shaky at first, but just to your point, the confidence. And there's great illustrations, of setting boundaries. And I think one of the best ones is recently Simone Biles, at the 2021 Olympics in Tokyo. She took a mental health break, which I don't think had really been discussed often.
I don't think it was discussed well in that moment either.
Yeah. It was kind of looked at as a negative thing.
It was. And I can see that perspective initially, but then when you think about, had she not protected her mental health, it was also going to damage her physical health. She could have been hurt, injured
Yeah.
very badly because of that misconnect
Mhm.
from her brain and her body.
She wasn't prepared, and she was risking her safety, her success. So to protect her goals, to protect herself mentally and physically, she took a break, and then she came back
And killed it.
and won 3 gold medals. And I mean, so, it's just a great example of how healthy
Yeah.
boundaries can be in our lives. I know
Yeah.
my first experience with boundaries was setting them with my mother, who I love dearly, but she can be a bit intrusive and a bit more controlling.
As moms do.
Uh-huh. And it finally came to a point where our relationship was very damaged, and I said, I can't do this anymore. And I had to have that difficult conversation and establish perimeters and boundaries. But our relationship, after a time, began to improve, and we just continue to grow because boundaries strengthen your
I
communication
agree.
so much. And if you haven't experienced it, you don't understand that. But once you do, I mean, it really does help us both share our feelings in the
Mhm.
moment better. It has improved our lifestyle. But I had a recent experience in my life with boundaries too, because you would kind of think once we're practicing a life skill, like, I got this, I'm good.
That's why they call it practicing.
I know how to do it. Yes, they're always practicing.
You never have it 100%.
No, and last year, when Hamas attacked Israel, and there were just all of these images coming through social media and news channels of just the human carnage, and it was nonstop coverage, I had to step away. I was
heavy, and I feel guilty even saying that because at the end of the day, I wasn't truly affected, but it was
Right.
just heavy just seeing it everywhere
Yes.
you went.
Yes, it's called compassion fatigue. It's an actual thing, and it's a trauma response. I was, very irritable. I started just having these fits of just crying and being overly emotional, and the guilt from living in an area that's so beautiful and so safe, and in a country, and for all of the things we could argue are bad, we're safe. There are certain things that will never happen to us that other people are living through, and it's like a secondary trauma, really. And so I had to establish a boundary and say, okay, 30 minutes to get my important information in the news, and then that's all I'm looking at the rest of the day. I can't see any videos, footage, nothing. If something's important to me, I can share what I know, but for at least a time, I was unable to view any of that because it was taking a toll on my mental and physical well-being.
In the same boat, I took a break from social media because it was just everywhere. And I felt guilty for being so upset about something that wasn't truly affecting me. However, I was in this fog, like a depression.
Mm-hmm.
Because you want to do everything that you can, but there's only so much that you can do.
Right.
And again, from living in such a perfect little space where we're pretty safe around here.
Yeah. Yes.
So I had to do the same kind of thing. Not as much with the news, because I gave up the news years ago, because it frustrates me. All of it. All of it. It's just so negative.
Yes.
But I can understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it leaves us feeling powerless, because you're like, this is so important, it's happening, it's damaging lives, all of these horrible things. What can I do? And honestly, I kind of got with my support team, which I think is really important when you start establishing boundaries. Have a support team, even if it's just one person that's going to be there and talk you through it and help you. And I had a little support team. We were all what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? And I even had a friend go over and help with the situation. And so what can we do? And what I found is something that worked for my boundaries that I was establishing, that also made me feel like I was contributing to the message of the situation and spreading correct information, was just to discuss it at your dinner table with your family, with those
to be
people
aware
close
of how lucky you are,
and just say, here's what this is why it hurts, here's what we can do. And to get yourself out of the social media cycle, out of watching a screen, and talk with your neighbors and your family, and just say,
I think we can just educate yourself on it.
Educate yourself. What can we do? And talk to people, because it's emotionally heavy. How can we feel? How can we do better? How can we feel like we're making a difference? Mm-hmm. And because sitting on a screen and watching it doesn't help anyone. It doesn't help the victims. It certainly doesn't help you personally in your life. It doesn't help your children or your loved ones. But getting out there and actually doing something, even if it's just discussing it over dinner, not only helps us, but helps relieve us of that anxiety and depression.
You're talking through it a little bit, and just getting it off your chest.
Yeah.
Because it's heavy. It's so heavy. Any kind of situation like that, anything that you feel helpless in.
Yes.
But and sometimes in those you do have to say, this is too, I don't have space for this. This is too much for me.
I don't have space for this.
I can't run normally with this going on in my brain too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just what it is.
Yeah. So important. I feel like we could talk about this forever.
We could. I think we both could.
Yeah, we could.
I know that with starting this podcast, I had said that's where my boundaries really came in hot this round. I say this round because you're practicing.
Mm-hmm.
And when you want to do something that not everybody can comprehend, or not anybody would just pick up and do, it seems a little left field to people.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have to say, well, this is what I want.
Yeah.
And I believe in it, and I'm going to keep pushing forward.
Yeah.
It's not harming anyone. It's a dream. And in order to be successful, I think that's another place that boundaries are vital. We're going to keep going with the fun. We'll get serious on some things and then fun on the others.
Yeah.
But thanks, guys, for joining for this episode of Pretty Walks and Ugly Talks. We'll see you next time.